Black kid helps a Hell's Angel with money. 1,000 bikers show up at her home the next day. The summer sun beat down on the cracked pavement of Riverside neighborhood, a place where hope seemed as scarce as the patches of grass struggling to survive between broken sidewalks. This was where 12-year-old Kiana Washington lived with her grandmother, Martha, in a modest house that had seen better days, but was filled with more love than most mansions could ever hold. Kiana was the kind of kid who noticed things other people missed. She noticed when Mr. Chen at the corner store looked tired because his arthritis was acting up. She noticed when the stray cat near the bus stop hadn't eaten in days. And on this particular scorching July afternoon, she noticed something that would change not just her life, but the lives of hundreds of people in her community. The Riverside neighborhood sat on the forgotten edge of Portland, Oregon, the kind of place politicians promised to revitalize during election seasons and then promptly forgot about once the votes were counted. The houses were a mixture of well-maintained homes belonging to families who refused to give up on their community, and abandoned properties that had become eyesores and havens for trouble. The local school was underfunded, the playground equipment was rusty and dangerous, and the community center had closed 3 years ago due to budget cuts. But the people of Riverside had something that couldn't be measured in tax dollars or property values. They had resilience, and they had each other. Block parties still happened in the summer. Neighbors still looked out for one another's children. And folks like Martha Washington still believed that teaching the next generation about kindness and community was the most important work anyone could do. Kiana had lived with her grandmother since she was 6 years old. Her mother, Martha's daughter, had struggled with addiction and was currently serving time in a rehabilitation facility, trying to get her life back together. Her father had never been in the picture. It was a story that was all too common in Riverside, but Martha refused to let it define Kiana's future. "Baby girl," Martha would tell her granddaughter, "we might not have much, but we have our dignity, our values, and our faith. You remember that. Being poor doesn't mean being powerless. Every single person has the power to make someone else's day a little better. That's real wealth." Martha worked 2 jobs, as a cafeteria worker at the elementary school during the day and cleaning offices at night. At 63 years old, she should have been thinking about retirement. But instead, she was raising a preteen and trying to make ends meet on wages that barely covered rent, utilities, and food. Still, she always found a way to give back. She volunteered at the church food bank on Saturdays, and her kitchen was always open to neighborhood kids who needed a meal or just a safe place to be. Kiana had inherited her grandmother's generous spirit. Despite having very little herself, she was always the first to share her lunch at school with a classmate who had forgotten theirs, always willing to help younger kids with their homework, and known throughout the neighborhood as a responsible, kind-hearted young person who could be trusted to run errands for elderly neighbors or watch younger children when parents needed help. She was small for her age, with her hair usually braided in neat cornrows that Martha spent hours perfecting each Sunday evening. And she had her grandmother's warm brown eyes that seemed to radiate kindness. She loved reading, devouring every book she could get her hands on at the public library. And she dreamed of becoming a veterinarian someday, though she had no idea how her grandmother would ever afford college. On this particular day, Kiana was walking back from the corner store where she'd been sent to buy milk and bread, with the carefully counted dollars and coins Martha had given her. She was thinking about the summer reading program at the library and whether she'd have time to finish the book about Jane Goodall she'd started when something caught her attention. On the side of the road, near a broken-down gas station that had been closed for years, sat a massive motorcycle, the kind Kiana had only seen in movies. It was chrome and black, gleaming despite the layer of dust from the road and it looked expensive. Next to it stood a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a different world entirely. He was tall and broad-shouldered, probably in his late 50s, with a gray beard and long hair pulled back in a ponytail. His arms were covered in tattoos, and he wore a leather vest covered in patches. The back of the vest displayed a distinctive emblem, a winged skull that Kiana didn't recognize, but which carried an unmistakable air of significance. This was Ruger, though Kiana didn't know his name yet, a longtime member of the Hells Angels motorcycle club. Ruger looked frustrated and worried, staring at his motorcycle with the expression of someone dealing with a serious problem. His phone was in his hand, but he kept putting it down and picking it up again, as if trying to decide whether to make a call. Most kids would have walked past, maybe crossed the street to avoid the intimidating-looking biker. But Kiana had been taught by her grandmother to see people, not stereotypes. And what she saw was someone who needed help. She approached cautiously, but without fear. "Excuse me, sir, are you okay?" Ruger looked down, surprised to see a young girl addressing him. His expression softened immediately. "Hey there, kiddo." "Yeah, I'm okay, just having some bike trouble. And my wallet seems to have fallen out somewhere along the road. Bad day all around." "What kind of trouble?" Kiana asked, genuinely interested. "Well, the engine overheated, and I need to let it cool down before I can ride again. But I also need to get some coolant from a shop, and like I said, I lost my wallet. Can't even call for a tow because my phone's about to die." He showed her the phone screen showing 5% battery. "I've got brothers who could help me, but I need to reach them first." Kiana considered this. She looked at the motorcycle, then at the man, then at the small convenience store about 2 blocks away that she knew sold automotive supplies. Then she looked at the bills and coins in her hand, the money her grandmother had given her for milk and bread. She did some quick mental math. If she bought what this man needed instead of the groceries, grandmother would be upset. They needed that milk and bread for dinner and tomorrow's breakfast. But this man was stranded, and helping people in need was what grandmother had always taught her to do. "What if I help you?" Kiana said. "I have some money. It's for groceries. But I could buy you some coolant and maybe a cheap phone charger from the dollar store. Would that help?" Ruger looked stunned. "Kid, I can't take your money. That's really kind of you, but my grandmother always says that helping others is never wrong." Kiana interrupted. "And you look like you really need help. I can explain to grandmother why I didn't get the groceries. She'll understand." Ruger stared at this small girl, offering to help a complete stranger, a scary-looking biker who most people crossed the street to avoid, with what was obviously money her family needed. Something in his chest tightened. In his 58 years and over 30 years with the club, he'd seen a lot of things. But genuine kindness from an unexpected source never failed to move him. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Kiana. Kiana Washington. I live just down the street with my grandmother." "Well, Kiana Washington, I'm Ruger. And I tell you what, I can't let you spend your grocery money on me. But if you'd be willing to let me use your phone to call one of my brothers, I'd really appreciate it. Can I pay you back for the call?" Kiana's face fell slightly. "I don't have a phone. Grandmother says I can get one when I'm 13 and can help pay for the plan." Ruger found himself smiling despite his situation. This kid was something special. "Okay, how about this? You know where I could buy a cheap phone charger around here? There's a dollar store 2 blocks that way." Kiana pointed. "They sell car chargers for $3. Ruger reached into his pocket and pulled out some coins, all he had on him since losing his wallet. He counted them out, $2.40. He was 60 cents short. Kiana saw his face and didn't hesitate. She dug into her pocket and pulled out 3 quarters that she'd been saving for a book at the library's used book sale. Here, now you have enough. Kiana, please take it. You need help, and I can help. That's what neighbors do, right? Even if we just met, we're still neighbors right now. There was such earnest sincerity in her voice that Ruger felt his throat tighten. He accepted the quarters. Tell you what, kiddo. Give me your address. Once I get sorted out here, I'm going to pay you back 10 times over. That's a promise. Kiana smiled. You don't have to do that. But if you want to know where I live, it's 247 Maple Street. The house with the blue shutters and the garden in front. Grandmother is really proud of that garden. 247 Maple Street, Ruger repeated, committing it to memory. The blue shutters. Got it. Now, you wouldn't want to do an old biker one more favor and run to that dollar store for me, would you? I can't leave the bike unattended in this neighborhood. Sure, Kiana said brightly. She took his money, plus the quarters she'd given him, and jogged off toward the dollar store. She returned 15 minutes later with a car charger, and Ruger plugged his phone into the motorcycle's charging port. As his phone powered up, he looked at Kiana seriously. You know what, kid? You've got a good heart. Don't ever lose that, okay? World tries to make people hard and suspicious, but you keep being exactly who you are. That's what grandmother says too, Kiana replied. She says kindness is the most important thing. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. Ruger's phone finally had enough charge to make calls. I should call my brothers now. You should probably head home before your grandmother worries. Okay, Kiana said. I hope your motorcycle gets better. As she walked away, Ruger watched her go. This small figure in worn clothes with a backpack, probably older than she was, who had been willing to give up her family's grocery money to help a stranger. He thought about his own daughter, who was around Kiana's age and lived with her mother in California. He tried to be a good father despite the distance and his lifestyle. And he hoped his daughter would grow up with half the character this kid had. Once Kiana was out of sight, Ruger made his call. His road captain, a man called Torch, answered on the second ring. Ruger, where the hell are you? We expected you at the clubhouse 2 hours ago. Had some trouble on the road, Ruger explained. Bike overheated, and I lost my wallet somewhere along Highway 26. I'm stuck on the east side of Portland, near Riverside. But listen, something just happened that you need to hear about. He told Torch the whole story, about Kiana, about her offer to spend her family's grocery money, about the quarters she'd been saving, about her grandmother's teachings on kindness. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Torch said, She lives at 247 Maple Street? Yeah, why? Because I know that neighborhood. It's rough, man. Really rough. High crime, poverty, drugs. If that kid and her grandmother are trying to hold it together there while still teaching kindness and helping strangers, they're fighting an uphill battle. I promised the kid I'd pay her back 10 times over, Ruger said. But I'm thinking maybe we could do more than that. This kid helped a biker in need without hesitation, without fear, just pure good-heartedness. That deserves recognition. What did you have in mind? Torch asked, but there was already interest in his voice. I'm thinking we call a church meeting. Run it by the president. This kid and her grandmother could probably use more help than just getting their grocery money back. And this feels like exactly the kind of thing we should be doing. looking after good people who are trying to do right in hard circumstances. "I'll make some calls," Torch said. "Meanwhile, I'm sending Tank and Whiskey to pick you up. They'll tow your bike, and we'll get it fixed up at Spider's shop." "Thanks, brother." "Hey, and Torch? I think this kid might have just reminded me why we do what we do. Why the club isn't just about riding and brotherhood. It's about standing up for people who deserve better than they're getting." "Amen to that," Torch replied. "See you soon." When Kiana got home, Martha was in the kitchen starting dinner. She looked up as her granddaughter entered and immediately noticed the absence of grocery bags. "Kiana, where's the milk and bread?" Kiana took a deep breath and explained everything. The stranded biker, the broken motorcycle, the lost wallet, the dying phone. Her decision to help instead of buying groceries. Martha listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When Kiana finished, there was a long moment of silence. Kiana braced herself for disappointment or anger, but instead, Martha's eyes filled with tears. "Come here, baby girl," Martha said, opening her arms. Kiana rushed into her grandmother's embrace. "I am so proud of you. You did exactly what I've always taught you. You saw someone in need and you helped, even though it cost you something. That's real character, Kiana. That's real faith in action." "You're not mad about the groceries?" Kiana asked, relieved but surprised. "Mad? Baby, no. We'll figure out dinner. We always do. But you can't put a price on doing the right thing. You helped someone today, and that matters more than milk and bread." Martha held her granddaughter at arm's length, looking into her eyes. "But I also want you to be careful. Not everyone is safe to approach, and that area where you found him isn't the best. You used good judgment this time, but always trust your instincts, okay?" "Okay, grandmother." The man seemed nice, though. His name was Ruger, and he said he'd pay me back 10 times over once he got home. I told him he didn't have to, but he insisted on knowing our address. A flicker of concern crossed Martha's face. "He knows where we live?" "I think it's okay, grandmother. He seemed really grateful and kind. Just kind of rough-looking on the outside." Martha decided to trust her granddaughter's judgment while remaining cautiously optimistic. They made dinner with what they had in the pantry, rice and beans with some vegetables from Martha's garden, and spent the evening as they usually did, with Kiana reading aloud from her library book while Martha mended clothes and listened. Neither of them could have imagined what the next day would bring. The following morning was Saturday, and Kiana woke to an unusual sound, a deep, rumbling thunder that seemed to grow louder and louder. She looked out her bedroom window, and her eyes went wide. Motorcycles. Dozens and dozens of motorcycles, all rolling slowly down Maple Street, heading directly toward her house. "Grandmother," Kiana called out, her voice high with surprise and a touch of fear. "Grandmother, come look." Martha came rushing into the room, and together they watched as an absolutely massive convoy of bikers, it had to be at least 1,000 of them, came to a stop in front of and around their house. The motorcycles filled the street, lined the sidewalks, and the rumble of all those engines was like physical force. Neighbors were emerging from their houses, staring in shock and confusion. Some looked frightened, others curious. The sight of so many Hell's Angels, their patches clearly visible on their leather vests, descending on the quiet residential street was unprecedented. Ruger was in the front, his motorcycle now running smoothly, and he dismounted along with several other men who carried themselves with obvious authority. These were the club's leadership. The president, vice president, road captain, and sergeant-at-arms of not just the local chapter, but representatives from chapters across the entire Pacific Northwest. Martha gripped Kiana's hand. "Stay close to me," she said quietly, though she didn't sound as afraid as she probably should have been. Years of living by faith had taught her to look for God's hand in unexpected places. They went to the front door together and opened it. The sight was overwhelming. A sea of leather, denim, chrome, and patches. Hundreds of weathered faces with beards and tattoos, but many of them smiling. Ruger stepped forward, removing his sunglasses. "Mrs. Washington, I'm Ruger. Your granddaughter helped me yesterday when I was stranded and had lost my wallet. I promised her I'd pay her back 10 times over. But after I told my brothers what she did, we decided that wasn't enough." Martha found her voice. "Sir, that's very kind, but Kiana didn't help you expecting anything in return. She helped because it was the right thing to do." "We know that, ma'am," said another man, stepping forward. He was younger than Ruger, probably in his mid-40s, with a president's patch on his vest. "That's exactly why we're here. See, our club has a code. We take care of our own, and we protect people who can't always protect themselves. When Ruger told us about your granddaughter, about a 12-year-old kid in a tough neighborhood who was willing to give up her family's grocery money to help a stranger, we knew we'd found something rare. Real character, real kindness. And that deserves to be honored." "I don't understand," Martha said, though Kiana was gripping her hand excitedly now, no longer afraid but amazed. A woman stepped forward from the crowd. There were actually quite a few women among the bikers, Kiana realized. She was probably in her 50s, with long gray hair and kind eyes. "Mrs. Washington, I'm Joanne. I'm what they call an old lady in the club, been married to one of these knuckleheads for 30 years. When the men told us what happened, we women got together and started making calls. We've been collecting donations and organizing this for the past 18 hours straight." Another man approached, this one carrying a large envelope. "Mrs. Washington, we know you work 2 jobs to take care of your granddaughter. We know this neighborhood has its challenges. We know you've been fighting to keep your house and give Kiana a good life. So we want to help." He handed her the envelope. Martha opened it with shaking hands and gasped. Inside was a check for $50,000. "That's from the club treasury and from personal donations from members across 6 chapters," Ruger explained. "It's to pay off whatever's left on your house, help with bills, and make sure Kiana has what she needs. We also have something for Kiana specifically." A younger biker, he couldn't have been more than 25, stepped forward carrying a box. "I'm Spider. I run a garage, and I'm also going to trade school to become a veterinary technician. Ruger told us you want to be a vet someday, Kiana. This is a college fund. We've put in $10,000 to start, and we're committing to adding to it every year until you're ready for college. You keep your grades up, you stay out of trouble, and you keep being the good kid you are. And we'll make sure you have the money you need for school." Kiana's eyes filled with tears. She looked up at her grandmother, who was openly crying now. "There's more," Joanne said gently. "We noticed your neighborhood doesn't have a safe place for kids to play. The old community center is closed, and the playground is falling apart. So we're fixing that. We've already got permits and contractors lined up. We're renovating the community center, refurbishing the playground, and setting up a tutoring program. Our club has lawyers, teachers, mechanics, nurses, all kinds of skilled people. We're going to volunteer our time to help this community." Martha found her voice, though it shook with emotion. "Why? Why would you do all this?" The club president spoke again. because your granddaughter reminded us what we stand for. People see us and they see outlaws, troublemakers, dangerous men. And yeah, we live outside society's normal rules sometimes. But we've also got our own code, our own honor. We protect the vulnerable. We stand up to bullies. We take care of our communities. Kiana helped one of our brothers when he needed it most, without hesitation, without expecting anything in return. That's the kind of character we respect. That's the kind of people we protect and support. Ruger knelt down to Kiana's level. You helped me with 3/4, kiddo. Money you'd been saving for something you wanted. You gave it up to help a stranger. That's the kind of thing that restores faith in humanity. And we wanted to make sure you and your grandmother know that kindness doesn't go unnoticed. It matters. You matter. Kiana threw her arms around Ruger's neck, hugging him tightly. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. The bikers stayed for hours. They unloaded trucks full of groceries, filled the Washington's pantry and refrigerator with months' worth of food. They brought new clothes for Kiana, school supplies, books for her collection. They brought furniture to replace pieces in the house that were worn out or broken. They brought toys and games, not just for Kiana, but for other kids in the neighborhood. And they didn't stop with the Washington house. They spread out through Riverside, introducing themselves to neighbors, asking what people needed, making lists. The woman who lived 3 houses down and was struggling to feed her 4 kids, they loaded her pantry too. The elderly man whose wheelchair ramp was falling apart. Spider and his crew started rebuilding it right there. The single dad whose car had broken down and who was about to lose his job because he couldn't get to work. The club's mechanics promised to fix it for free. What could have been an intimidating invasion of a neighborhood by a motorcycle club became something completely different. A blessing, a miracle, a demonstration of what community really meant. News crews showed up, drawn by reports of a massive biker gathering. But instead of trouble, they found stories of generosity and kindness. They interviewed Martha, who spoke through tears about her granddaughter's compassionate heart and the unexpected angels who had showed up to reward it. They interviewed Ruger, who explained the club's code and mission. They interviewed neighbors who talked about feeling hope for the first time in years. The story went viral. Hell's Angels Help Poor Neighborhood read headlines across the country. Social media exploded with the story of Kiana, the 12-year-old who helped a stranded biker with her last 3/4 and inspired a movement. Donations started pouring in from across the country. Not to the Hell's Angels, but to the newly formed Riverside Community Fund that the club had established to manage ongoing support for the neighborhood. Within a week, they had raised over $200,000. Within a month, it was $500,000. True to their word, the bikers returned regularly. They renovated the community center, which reopened as a place offering tutoring, job training, after-school programs, and community meals. They refurbished the playground, installing safe, modern equipment. They organized regular community days where they provided free motorcycle safety courses, taught kids about mechanics and trades, and connected people with resources. Spider became a particular fixture, stopping by weekly to check on Kiana and encourage her veterinary dreams. He brought her books about animals and veterinary medicine, and when she was old enough, he arranged for her to volunteer at a local vet clinic. Joanne and the other club women started a mentorship program, pairing women and girls in the neighborhood with positive role models. They taught financial literacy, job skills, and self-defense. They created a support network that helped families navigate everything from food assistance to legal troubles to healthcare access. The transformation of Riverside didn't happen overnight, but it did happen. Crime rates dropped as people felt more invested in their community. High school graduation rates increased as more students had access to tutoring and support. Small businesses started opening in previously abandoned storefronts. The neighborhood that had been written off as hopeless started to thrive. And at the center of it all was Kiana Washington, the girl who had seen a stranger in need and hadn't hesitated to help. She continued to excel in school, maintained straight A's, and never lost the compassionate heart that had started everything. She volunteered at the community center, helped with the younger kids in the tutoring program, and worked part-time at the veterinary clinic once she was old enough. When Kiana turned 18 and graduated as valedictorian of her high school class, over 100 Hells Angels attended the ceremony. They cheered louder than anyone when she walked across the stage, and when she gave her speech, she spoke about the day she met Ruger and how one small act of kindness had changed everything. "I didn't help him because I expected anything in return," Kiana said to the assembled graduates, families, and teachers. "I helped him because my grandmother taught me that's what you do. You see someone who needs help, and you help if you can." What I didn't understand then was how powerful that simple principle could be. My grandmother always said that kindness creates ripples, that one good deed can spread and multiply in ways we can't imagine. She was right. Those 3/4 I gave to a stranger turned into this: a transformed community, hundreds of families helped, opportunities created for people who had given up hope. That's the power of choosing kindness. That's the power of being willing to help even when it costs you something. The Hells Angels stood and applauded, and soon the entire auditorium was on its feet. Kiana attended college on a full scholarship. The fund the bikers had started had grown substantially thanks to their continued contributions and investment, and graduated with honors 4 years later with a degree in veterinary medicine. She was accepted into one of the top veterinary schools in the country, and throughout her education, the club continued to support her, financially and emotionally. Dr. Kiana Washington opened her practice in Riverside, in a building the club helped her purchase and renovate. Her clinic offered affordable veterinary care, with a sliding scale for families who couldn't afford normal rates and a program that provided free spaying and neutering for community animals. She employed several people from the neighborhood, creating jobs and opportunities. On the day her clinic opened, every Hells Angel who could make it showed up for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Ruger, now in his 70s and still riding, had the honor of cutting the ribbon alongside Kiana and Martha, who was proudly crying, as she always did, at her granddaughter's achievements. "You know," Ruger said to the assembled crowd, "people always want to know why a bunch of bikers would care so much about one kid. They want to know what makes us show up year after year, what makes us invest in this community, what keeps us coming back. And the answer is simple. It's because Kiana reminded us who we're supposed to be. Not just outlaws or rebels, but protectors, guardians, people who stand up for what's right even when nobody's watching." She was 12 years old and she gave everything she had to help a stranger. How could we do any less? The story of Kiana and the Hells Angels became legendary, told and retold across the country. It inspired other motorcycle clubs to start similar community outreach programs. It changed the way many people thought about bikers and the stereotypes surrounding them. It became a case study in sociology and community development courses about how grassroots initiatives could transform neighborhoods. But more importantly, it inspired countless acts of everyday kindness. People heard Kiana's story and decided to help the stranger in need, to give to someone less fortunate, to look beyond stereotypes and see the humanity in others. Parents told their children about the girl who gave her last 3/4 to a biker and started a movement. Teachers used it as an example of how one person's actions could create enormous positive change. Martha lived to see her granddaughter become Dr. Washington, to see the neighborhood transformed, to see the legacy of kindness she had instilled continue to spread. She passed away peacefully at 81, surrounded by family in a house full of bikers who had become family over the years. At her funeral, over 2,000 people showed up. Neighbors, community members, and Hell's Angels from across the country, all coming to pay respects to the woman whose teachings had started it all. Ruger gave the eulogy, his voice strong despite his age. Martha Washington taught her granddaughter that kindness was the most important thing, that helping others was always worth it, that we're all responsible for taking care of each other. And because she taught those lessons so well, because Kiana lived them so fully, hundreds of lives have been changed. Thousands of people have been helped. This community has been transformed. That's Martha's legacy. That's what one woman's faith and principles created. We're all here today because she raised a girl who gave 3/4 to a stranger. And I think that's about the best legacy anyone could ask for. The Riverside Community Center was renamed the Martha Washington Community Center in her honor, and a statue was erected in the refurbished park, not of Martha, though they had wanted to do that, but of a young girl offering coins to a motorcycle rider. The plaque read, "In honor of Kiana Washington, whose kindness inspired a movement, and Martha Washington, whose teachings made it possible." May we all remember that no act of compassion is ever too small, and no person is too insignificant to change the world. Years later, when Kiana had children of her own, she would bring them to the park and tell them the story. She'd point to the statue and say, "That's supposed to be me when I was 12, helping a man whose motorcycle had broken down. I gave him some money I'd been saving, not because I wanted anything back, but because Grandma Martha taught me that's what you do. You help people when they need it. And you know what happened? It changed everything." Her children would ask, like children always do, "But how did helping one person change everything?" And Kiana would smile and say, "Because kindness is contagious. Because when people see goodness, they want to be good too. Because sometimes the people who look scariest on the outside have the biggest hearts on the inside. And because when you do the right thing, even when it's hard, even when it costs you something, you never know how far the ripples will spread." But most importantly, she would continue, it changed everything, because those bikers didn't just help me and Grandma Martha. They helped our whole neighborhood. They showed everyone that people care, that we're not alone, that there are others out there who will stand up and protect those who need protecting. They reminded us that family isn't just about blood. It's about showing up for each other. And they taught us that everyone, no matter how tough or scary they might seem, is capable of extraordinary kindness. The story of Kiana Washington and the Hell's Angels became more than just a viral news story or an inspiring anecdote. It became a reminder that we all have the power to change lives through simple acts of compassion, that stereotypes can blind us to the good in others, that communities can heal and transform when people decide to care, that children are watching us and learning from our examples, and that sometimes the smallest gestures, 3/4 given to a stranger, can create ripples that turn into waves that transform entire communities. The Riverside neighborhood continued to thrive. The Hell's Angels continued their commitment, with new generations of club members taking up the mantle. The community center thrived. The Yatham Clinic thrived. Small businesses flourished, and children grew up with opportunities their parents never had. And through it all, the lesson remained clear. Never underestimate the power of kindness. Never judge people by their appearance. Never think you're too small or too insignificant to make a difference. Because somewhere, right now, There's a 12-year-old girl with 3 quarters in her pocket who might just change the world if she chooses compassion over fear, generosity over selfishness, and action over apathy. That's the real message of Kiana's story. Not that we should all expect massive rewards for doing good deeds. Most acts of kindness go unrewarded in material ways. But that we should do them anyway. Because kindness is its own reward, and because you truly never know when your small act of compassion might be exactly what someone needs. Exactly when they need it. Ruger carried a photo of Kiana in his wallet until the day he died at 83. Still riding, still living by the code, still believing in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. And whenever anyone asked him about his greatest accomplishment in all his years with the club, he wouldn't talk about rides or rallies or brotherhood. He'd pull out that photo and say, "This kid." Being reminded by this kid that goodness still exists in the world, and then getting to honor it. That's my greatest accomplishment. Because in the end, that's what it was all about. Not the money raised, or the programs started, or the buildings renovated, though all of that mattered. It was about recognizing and celebrating genuine goodness when you encountered it. It was about being the kind of people who, when faced with selfless compassion, responded with overwhelming generosity. It was about living by a code that valued loyalty, honor, and protecting the vulnerable. It was about proving that family could be chosen, that communities could heal, and that there were still heroes in the world. They just sometimes wore leather jackets, rode motorcycles. And it all started with a little girl, 3 quarters, and a choice to help.